Now.
Hello. Welcome to episode
27.
Episode 27 of the Team House with your ever diligent, investigative reporter.
I feel like Wayne's World.
Journalist extraordinaire Jack Murphy, and I'm just some bum, Dave Park.
And we are here with our guest today, retired Green Beret Greg Walker. Greg served in like half of the Special Forces groups, if you look at his resume. You had a really interesting career, Greg, and then also spent time in Iraq as a contractor, spent time working with the Special Ops Care Coalition, taking care of some of our soldiers who needed help. Greg has done a lot in his long life, and he's also an author, a journalist. One of the books that he wrote is At the Hurricane's Eye, U.S. Special Operations Forces from Vietnam to Desert Storm. This is what it looks like. If any of you are interested, I highly recommend you go and pick this up. This is one of those books that anybody who's interested in special operations history really needs to have. So, without further ado, we'll get to Greg. Greg, sorry for the hiccup. But Greg, tonight there are a lot of things we could talk about, but what I really want to talk to you about tonight is the history of U.S. Special Forces in Central America. You were one of those troops down in El Salvador, and you also spent a lot of time researching and writing about the topic, and I feel like this is just a subject that there's a lot of mythology around, there's a lot of BS, but there's also a lot of heroism, there's a lot of professional soldiering that happened down there, but it's also against the backdrop of some really horrific war crimes and human rights violations, and I thought you would be the perfect person on to talk about, to really drill into some of the nuances of what really happened down there.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely, Greg. We're both excited to have you here. I figured that a good place to start would be to introduce this topic by looking at the geopolitical situation at the time, the wider conflict of the war against communism, and how these deployments and our troops were deployed down to Central America. I mean, I think it's important to remember that there were covert operations happening in Afghanistan, Angola, other places around the world where we were trying to fight communism. One of those battlegrounds became Central America.
Well, the battlegrounds in Central America really have to include South America as well, because they're all interconnected.
Yes.
They're all either very fraternal or no longer fraternal. And it goes back many, many, many years, of course, primarily because of our corporate interests in these different countries. The low, cheap labor that's available to our corporations, and the strategic positioning of some of the different countries, Panama being the easiest to describe with the Panama Canal, and the ability to transit warships through there and things like that. So literally, if you go back 150, 160 years, almost every country down there has had some kind of either a revolution or some kind of an occupation or intervention by ourselves.
What do you think made so many of the countries down there ripe for a quote-unquote revolution? One of the interesting books I read was Conflicting Missions, which talks about the history primarily of the Cubans and Che Guevara trying to export the revolution from Cuba to Central and South America. When that didn't take, he pivoted to Africa. And when he blew out of Africa, he actually got chased out of Africa by the CIA and others. There was actually Navy SEALs working as contractors there that helped chase Guevara out, but that's a whole other topic for another show. Kay then went to South America and Central America and really started trying to initiate these revolutions in earnest. And I was wondering if you could just speak to a little of that. Am I exaggerating the Cuban influence? Well, what made these countries so turbulent and susceptible to communist influence?
Oh, economic conditions, the poorness of the people, the richness of the land and the resources and the materials and the potential, and the very unequal disposition of wealth. You have essentially early on, the very wealthy, and then you had the very poor. Mm-hmm. And that's just a breeding ground. It's 101 for revolutionary warfare, regardless of what the political system is that is encouraging the insurgency or the conflict. The other, in the 20th century, the interests of Russia to export communism, which was actually exporting its own form of imperialism into Latin America, South America, and Central America. And the revolutionary groups and the Russians obviously met with each other, spoke with each other. Guevara and the Castro brothers are, a prime example. And it was, essentially the Russians said, we'll supply you, we'll teach you, we'll train you, and we'll also be a very big stick for you in terms of the United States they offer that they're going to intervene. We'll fight battles in the UN for you, which of course they did in Cuba. They did that in El Salvador. There was, to a degree, in Guatemala, although Guatemala went down very, very quickly. So you have, you've got it A to Z. And the key is the ricos, the rich down there, didn't want to give anything away or give anything up. And the poor were, ripe to be exploited by the doctrine that was coming in, and then be armed, and then go into the streets, into the mountains, into the jungles.
Well, doesn't sort of the whole Marxist idea, it relies on that sort of class differentiation, that big disparity between classes. I mean, if it doesn't work with that, then they have to find some other type of wedge to drive between people, right?
Yeah, but absolutely. In Bolivia with Guevara and the revolutionary movement that was already in Bolivia, it was also already in Argentina. In Bolivia, what Guevara found out was that the Bolivians living in the cities were actually pretty happy. And the Bolivian government was actually doing a pretty good job. So there was literally, for all intents and purposes, there was no urban organizational structure that the Bolivian Communist Party could influence and ramp up and get them behind doing war in the cities. And the peasants out in the rural areas, well, they were pretty happy too. Because this reach of the government into the Bolivian rural areas really wasn't all that strong.
Yeah.
So, they, every once in a while they had to put up with some silliness perhaps, but they could pretty much do as they pleased. And at the same time, they had these people coming in trying to agitate them. That scared them. And so they did report. We've got foreigners here, we got strangers here with guns that want us to do stuff, and here's where they are. So, in that particular case, he misjudged his potential environment pretty badly.
Yeah.
The documentary you asked me to watch, Greg, they pointed out that, when the Salvadorian military responded to communist insurgency, they came down very hard on the civilian population with the assumption that anyone who was poor was a communist. Is that something that you agree, something that further agitated the situation?
Yeah, well, what's really interesting about that, and it's a great question, is in the late 50s, 56, 57 roughly, the southern, what they call the Southern Cone, which was Brazil, the South American countries, primarily, they were very anti-socialist and anti-communist. And their thought process, they knew this is what they want to do and what they want to make of us. And they, of course, they just looked over to Cuba and watched it unfold there. And so long story short, they decided that they were going to take extraordinary means to stamp out any kind of communist influence or presence in their countries. And they formed a confederation, and then they started a program that was called the Condor Program.
Yeah.
And Condor was very much welcomed by the United States government and several administrations at the time. And so we ended up financing and providing training both in the United States, primarily down in Florida, and in the countries. And Condor was a search and destroy operation.
Yeah, it was an assassination program, and it led to an assassination on Embassy Row in the United States.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. They really took it to heart. They were very encouraged by us, the Latin American countries that were participating. They developed extraordinary means of interrogation, kidnapping, the suppression of the media, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and utilized a number of different forms. There were a number of former Nazi officers, SS officers, and others, Gestapo officers, that actually were already living there in the different countries and were acting as either consultants or as trainers or as contractors, as we would call them today. And they set up a lot of the programs that they utilized during World War II. And so this seeped over into Central America. Condor got shut down because of primarily, and this is a simplification, of course, primarily because of the dirty war in Argentina. It got so bad, they were killing so many people, and
if you read the book, The Condor Years, there's a lot of consternation about, did Kissinger withdraw his support or not? Did he fake withdraw it, but then send another cable rescinding his previous order? And the book was written by a journalist who's a professor at J School at Columbia, and I went to his office hours, even though he wasn't my teacher, and spoke with him for a few hours. I'm sure you've read it, Greg, but it's definitely worth tracking down. The Condor Years is the name of the book.
Yes. Yeah. Basically, it seeped over into Central America, and we just rolled with it. And the Salvadorans were receptive to it. And the primary thought process at the time, and if we focus on El Salvador, was the only good communist is a dead communist. And that anybody that even entertained or spoke out or seemed sensitive to what was perceived to be communism or socialism, the only good one was a dead one. And, that's how they proceeded. Monterossa and many other Salvadoran officers, as young officers, they didn't go to our schools. There's a lot made of the School of the Americas, of course, the School of Torture, the School of this and that and everything. Back in the early days, in the 70s, in the late 70s, where these guys went to school was Taiwan. And they went to the counterinsurgency school in Taiwan.
Really?
And that school is extraordinarily hardcore. Taking lessons from, of course, Vietnam, Indochina, Indonesia, Malaysia, and that's the tactics and techniques in Southeast Asia was basically find them, fix them, and kill them. And so they brought that back to El Salvador, for example, and instituted it through the Officer Academy. And of course, the Officer Academy officers came down, and that's what they tried to inculcate into the troops. And then you have the Condor countries as well as the United States offering with what Taiwan was, tactics, techniques, and strategies.
Sorry, you broke up there a little bit, Greg, but if I'm tracking, you're saying that between the Condor system, influenced to some extent by literal Nazis, and this school over in Taiwan, both had a pretty profound influence on, what turned into death squads in El Salvador.
Yeah, that's correct. And of course, the other side of the coin was you did have Russian communists. You did have the North Vietnamese become involved. The East Germans become involved. You did have, all these really severe forms of communism, the pure form, so to speak, and they taught the same thing. Any means, any tactic, any technique in order to win was perfectly acceptable under revolutionary warfare.
Yeah, if you look at the history of even just the Contras and the Sandinistas, nobody had clean hands when it came down to what there were no angels in that fight.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Greg, thank you for helping to flesh out the historical context that this conflict happened in. I kind of now wanted to make it a little bit more personal and ask about you.
Yeah.
And you find yourself in Special Forces as a young Green Beret. You're fixing to get deployed down to South America. Could you tell us a little bit about you as a young man coming into Special Forces at that time, and what's going through your mind as you're gearing up for this mission in Central America?
Let's get a quick bio. We haven't really introduced him to our guests. You want to?
No. I gave a little overview. If we go into a full bio,
it'll take 20 minutes.
Take a little while.
Oh. In a nutshell, I'd always, from a very young age, been interested in military type things. I was born in 1953, so I came up through the late 50s and the early 60s, particularly with World War II in the background, with Korea in the background. The television programs at the time, if you were a little kid, we watched Swamp Fox, we watched Rat Patrol, we watched Combat, we watched Garrison's Gorillas, and so, I was just absolutely fascinated with it. And my family's got a very fair military history going back, a couple of different wars. And but what really got me going was guerrilla warfare. Especially Swamp Fox and Francis Marion and all those guys out there doing stuff, not wearing uniforms and, beating the British and everybody else. So really at age 14, when the Special Forces started to become popular in the media, I was, it was like, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to be. And it took me a while to get there, obviously, but I went into the service in 1975. By 1980, I was at the Q course, 3-80, and by 1981, I completed the Q course, and I was at 10th Group at Fort Devens at the time, and was only there for about 5 or 6 months. Really good training in urban type thought processes, because we were targeted at that time for Eastern Europe. And our particular country at that time was Hungary. So I got some just excellent training in doing all sorts of, clandestine urban type thought processes. We ran incredible missions in Providence, Rhode Island, and Fall River, Massachusetts, week-long, running through the cities, chasing teams and being teams chased and hitting targets and working with the police department and the corrections people. It was great Special Forces stuff. But then I went to language school because that was one of the, I came in the old-fashioned way. I was on my second enlistment. I was an E5. I had 2 MOSs. It was like, okay, if you're in Special Forces, you got to speak a second language. So I went to DLI in Monterey to take Hungarian, and found out that while I was there, found out that I'd broken the tip off my right shoulder in the Q course, and it was starting to give me some real problems. So I had a shoulder surgery, and Mrs. White, Mrs. Alexander, who at that time were the 2 gals in D.C. that handled all Special Forces assignments. And, you'd call Mrs. Alexander, Mrs. White, and you'd say, I want to go here, I'd like to go to that. And then you send a big bouquet. Those gals must have had more flowers in their closets, than they were wonderful. And Mrs. Alexander said, well, you can stay at Monterey and get your shoulder surgery, but you'll be out for 30 days on convalescent leave, or you can go back to Fort Devens and get your shoulder surgery convalescent, and come back out to DLI. And I didn't want to do that. Carol and I had just had our first child, and so I said, well, what happens if I stay here? And she said, well, you can take another language if you want. By that time, El Salvador was really starting to bumble and mumble, and so I said, great, I want to go down to the 3rd or the 7th in Panama and take Portuguese. So I already spoke Spanish. We had to take Spanish in junior high and high school, so I had a working knowledge. And that's what I did 30 days convalescent leave, and went in and took Portuguese, and next thing I knew, I was getting off the plane down at Howard Air Force Base.
So I would like you to talk a little bit about 3-7. So at that time, we had Special Forces elements, and we still do. We have some forward deployed to Okinawa, Japan. We have them in Germany. But we used to have some down in South America, in Panama, at Fort Gulick. And before the War on Terror was a thing, back in the old days, 3-7 was like the place to be, because that's where all the action was. And there were some real heavy hitters down there at the time, Greg.
Yeah, I got down there, and that was, quite frankly, like so many of us, it was like I'd done a lot of training for a lot of years here, and now I want to go see if I can do it, right. So we had about 70 guys at DLI in Monterey from Special Forces. Colonel Roger Donlin was there for the FAO course, and so he was the unofficial group commander for the West Coast. And just some of the most phenomenal guys that I had met, and a big slice of them came down to 3-7. Another big slice went to Det A in Berlin at the time, and so when I got down there, I knew a lot of the guys coming down, and I knew they were top notch. And then when I got there and got introduced to the folks actually in the battalion, we were at Gulick at that time. About 6 or 7 months later, we moved over to Fort Davis. And I started to realize that there were a bunch of former MACV SOG Special Forces guys that had been brought down there. And my team sergeant, my first team was MACV SOG. I mean, there was a bunch of them. And that's who trained us. And the Army and the Special Forces have gone out and said, okay, we got this going on in El Salvador, we got this going on in Honduras, we got this going on down in Colombia, we got this going on in Nicaragua, because we still got to watch that situation. So let's bring these guys down and have them essentially train the young pups and to do good things. And of course, I'm a historian of Special Forces, so I'm running into guys literally that I meet them and I go, "Holy crap, you're Joe Lopez from the Mike Force in Vietnam. I've seen pictures of you," and on and on and on. It was neat, and they were good. They were good.
They knew a thing or two about jungle fighting.
They knew a thing or two about fighting anywhere. To include in the NCO club and over at Howard Air Force Base, Rowdy Yates, on the weekends when we had our, the different parties around the area, Rowdy used to like to wear shorts and a tank top or a t-shirt, and he had a black MP helmet liner that he wore. And the story behind that is that he took it away from an MP after he thumped him. And that was very normal stuff I learned. That was, that was like, stuff like that happened. They were a great group of guys. And the team sergeants ran the teams. We had team leaders down there that were really good. We had a few that weren't, but that's the norm. But the team sergeants absolutely down there, they ran those teams, and the team leaders listened to them. And that was pretty interesting. I was so new to Special Forces that half of me was in the glamour of it, and half of me was, just trying to figure out, how am I going to fit in here?
So was your first deployment down to, or from Panama, I should say, up to El Salvador?
Yeah, my first deployment came in 1983. After the company that I was with at the time, after we had the opportunity to train the first Salvadoran reconnaissance company down in El Salvador, the PROL, which was long-range reconnaissance patrol, and we had them for 90 days. The SOG influence and POI was definitely in there. We prepped for that for months. The soldiers that were picked were hand-selected. They had to know how to swim. They had to know how to read. They had to know how to do math. They had to take a PT test and a swim test when they got down to us. They had to be, combat veterans. Their officers, their lieutenants, and that, had to be really sharp. We had a Captain Herrera, who was the company commander, and they came down, and we had them for 90 days, 20 days in classrooms, and 70 days in the jungle.
Wow!
And those guys literally changed the course of the war in about 2 to 3 years because of what they were able to do and what they could do, and just how incredibly they'd take on anything. When they went back, we had 2 retired Special Forces guys who actually ran them. They were working paramilitary for the OGA. That was Mike Kim and Frisbee. And they knew their stuff. Mike had been down at 3-7, so he knew the deal, and he was phenomenal. And they put him out at Ilopango, and that was just like it was like a mini CCN. They had their own aircraft, they had their own barracks, they had their own weapons. Everything was top shelf, and they did it all. They ran for 3 years before they took their first KIA, which was ridiculous. I mean, phenomenal. So after that, in '83, when our team finally went up north, that was the background. Down really good.
So you were bringing them down to Panama for a number of years and training them there. And then, do you want to cover a little bit about the actual SF deployments elsewhere in South America and how El Salvador got capped? Because you make the point in your book that SF had been in Central America in the 1960s, in the 1970s. There were already deployments happening.
Yeah, El Salvador at the time was extraordinarily unique because it was the one place in Central America and in Latin America that we were absolutely at war, the United States. That really became apparent in 1982. And that's where our 10-year for the Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal and other combat awards and decorations ultimately in 1996, 1997 came from, was 82 to 92. Those were the critical years. And all the documentation that came forward when, after I had gotten out in 85 from active duty, and we were working on that grassroots program with the Congress, all the official documentation said, you know, these guys are at war down there. You're drawing imminent danger pay. In 1986, it got so strange that the JAG of the Pentagon was asked to do a legal paper because, you know, the officers down there at the Mill Group and with the teams, they were putting guys in for Purple Hearts, they were putting them in for Bronze Stars, they were putting them in for ARCOMs with Bs, putting them in for CIVs. And of course, the administration, the Reagan administration, you know, their thing was, nope, they're just there training. All they do is just train.
And the viewers who don't understand what we're talking about, basically, there was a non-declared war going on for those 10 years in which the troops involved, the Special Forces soldiers involved, were not getting recognized as combat soldiers. They weren't getting the awards that combat soldiers would be eligible for. They weren't getting the pay. They weren't. And so you were a big part of working on getting that recognized, sort of backdated, right?
Yeah, I myself and Colonel John McMullen, who had been down there, who I later worked with in Iraq. It was just a labor of love. Couldn't figure it out after I came back and said, you know, I wanted to join the VFW. And the VFW guys in Bend, Oregon said, you got to have an Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal.
Right.
And you guys don't have one. And I thought, I'm just out of the Army after 10 years. I thought, well, how hard can that be? Yeah, right, I'll, you know, get something from the VFW and send it to the Pentagon. That took 10 years of blood, sweat, and tears. Some just incredibly dedicated people along the way that came out of nowhere, and we were finally successful. It's the only counterinsurgency that has ever been congressionally mandated after it was over.
So the real question is, the real question is, did you ever manage to get in the VFW?
Did I ever imagine what?
No, did you ever manage to get into the VFW after that?
I did.
So all that effort paid off.
It was, you know, the more I got into it, and John McMullen was on active duty at the time and working out of the Pentagon. We had, you know, the Special Forces El Salvador Mafia was alive and well. And, you know, it was one of the greatest clandestine operations to see this happen politically. There was never a dime donated. There was never a raffle. This was just all just hard work, 24/7. And the key players in that, myself, John McMullen, Andy Messing from the National Defense Council Foundation in D.C., a number of Special Forces generals and conventional generals have sent letters after a while, because we just kept rolling. We just kept building evidence upon evidence and documentation upon documentation, and then using the media, any media, to get the word out that this did happen. Major General retired Ken Bowra, MACV-SOG, CCN, OGA, one of the finest Special Forces officers I've ever worked for. He was at USSOCOM in the crunch period leading up to 1995, 1996, and he put our packet forward 3 times. And 2 times, Department of the Army and Awards and Decorations kicked it back, and Ken just scooped it back up had his staff do what it needed to do, and send it in. I said, there were times where I said, sir, I'd known him for a while, and I'd worked for him, and I worked for him afterwards. I said, are you going to hurt yourself career-wise doing this? Because nobody wants this up in D.C. And at that time, he was a brigadier, and I thought, And one thing that General Bowra always said, he said, Greg, if you do what's right and what's fair for the troops, you will always be successful. And he just looked at me and said, it's the right thing to do. And he sent it forward the third time, and that was a charm. They just said, no mas.
This was very controversial because our government had such a vested interest. They had already committed to this narrative that there were no combat troops in El Salvador. And by giving you guys decorations, your combat infantry badges, your Bronze Stars with V devices, it's essentially our government coming clean and saying, well, okay, yeah, actually, they were at war.
Yeah, if you look at the narrative throughout that entire period, it was definitely that. I watched a little clip with Ronald Reagan the other night where he was addressing Congress, and he said, "For all of you that invoke the memory of Vietnam and the tragedy of Vietnam, I can tell you right now that there is no thought of sending American combat troops to Central America and Latin America. They are not needed." And he got a standing ovation. Well, we were already, our guys were already, we'd already had seen Purple Hearts awarded. That was weird too, because Purple Hearts could be awarded, but nothing else. And what was also weird is that the Marine Corps, in the period that the Army was denying everything and squashing everything, and the Marine Corps, which had people down there, advisors, they were giving combat action ribbons, which they could, count our C and Bronze Stars. Mm-hmm. And the Air Force, which was flying, lots of overhead flights and doing surveillance and everything, those guys were picking up air medals. And so, as you see this documentation come in and all these different people and after action reports, literally I'd get packages from people I didn't even know. They had just seen or heard something. They said, don't mention my name. You might find this interesting. It was like, this is totally schizophrenic. This makes no sense at all.
To start, Greg, if we could drill down a little deeper into it, because there was this cap on how many Special Forces soldiers we could have in El Salvador. It's capped at 55, if I'm not mistaken. But there were other creative ways that our government found to go above that 55 limit.
Yeah, 55 was a artificial limit. They sent a colonel down there to do, because things were starting to bubble up, and they said to go down to El Salvador and see what we would need to, to help them down there. Because Nicaragua had fallen, and that sent shudders throughout, like nobody's business. And Salvador was next. And Reagan said, and it's right there in a beautiful RAND report on El Salvador that we utilized quite heavily. Reagan said, red line in the sand is El Salvador. And he was not kidding. It wasn't the Obama red line in Syria, which was really kind of not there. It stops here. Mm-hmm. And so this colonel goes down, and he comes back, and they said, well, how many should we have down there? And he said, well, they've had 50, 55 for a very long period of time. We had advisors there in the late 70s, but it was a kind of a garden spot thing. You went down and, you retired on active duty. And they said, okay, 55's it. With no real understanding of how much work needed to be done in every single level with the Salvadoran military, and not understanding just how damn good the FMLN and the guerrillas were. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, okay, the 55 sounds good, it's less than 100, and that's what they sold them. Hey, we're only going to send 55. And
but they found a way. I mean, weren't they also packing the defense attache's office full of Green Berets, and they were also attaching other SF guys to various CIA elements and deploying them into the country so they could get it up to whatever it was, 150 or so?
When we first got in there, when the country almost went down in 1981, when the guerrillas did their first final offensive, they almost took the country. And it's kudos to the Salvadoran military, as ragtag as it was, that they fended them off. So when we actually got in there, the first team went in 81, and then more teams started going in 82, 83, 84. But the FMLN became more and more and more active. They were formidable fighters. And so it was like, okay, the mill group in El Salvador, and again, I'm oversimplifying things, the mill group down there was saying, hey, we need like more guys. This 55 thing is, but the Congress said, no, we're not doing another Vietnam. You said 55, and it's going to be 55. So they got very creative, and they said, okay, that's 55 at the mill group and 55 trainers. That's 55. Okay, but we're also allocated 10 slots for communication specialists. So you would see communication special slots get picked up by special forces guys because, we can do communications too.
Right.
And all these little slots that, so we ended up, the best that we named our organization the VSOES, Veterans of Special Operations El Salvador, and the best number we could put, relying on active duty still in, supplying us with information, and the veterans on the outside working it and being the public face, was we probably had 135 to 150, advisors down there at any one time, and but Congress only cared about the magic 55, the double nickel,
right?
And I'll tell you what, if you went to 56, and they found out, they raised hell. That mill group every day had to report on where the 55 were.
Yeah.
I had a 7th group soldier tell me one time that maybe they were in Panama, and he's like, we were waiting on the tarmac for our plane to take off to El Salvador. Like, we were waiting for guys to come out of El Salvador so that they could go in. Wow. And the number remained at 55.
Yeah, it was just really something. And I got to say right here, I was just a new Special Forces guy. And I was just really fortunate to get down there and be able to do the job. There were so many other guys down there that did so much more and were so much better than I was. So any story that I relate, personally about me, that's just because it's easy for me to remember my own stories. But there were guys down there that were just absolutely phenomenal. Here's one of those stories. I was number 56 for a day and a night, and that came in 84. I got, we had a SF composite team up on Tiger Island in the Gulf of Fonseca.
Oh, yeah.
Right off of La Union. Well, my team had just come out of La Union, setting up the first Salvadoran training base, formal training base. So I knew La Union. And Tiger Island is a very large island out in the Gulf, and it's about 5, 6, 7 clicks off the coast of Nicaragua and Honduras. And it was the Marines at the time, and this isn't secret at all anymore, but the Marines had a very important communications relay site up on the top of Tiger Island, and they could hear and capture everything. And then at the bottom of Tiger Island, the agency had a little house, and they were doing their agency stuff against Nicaragua. So the Southcom commander said, the Marines said, well, Tiger Island's ours, because we're up at the top and we got this at the time, Paul Gorman. He said, oh no, he says, the Marines aren't going to have that island. I want a special forces presence on that island. So they created a composite team and sent a composite team up there. I got sent up for a rotation. And so we had the bottom of the island on the OGA base, and the Marines had the top of the island. And long story short, our team leader was a very, very young team leader and wanted to make a name for himself, and got himself in a jam with the Honduran commander for Tiger Island. And basically they were having a children's weekend, and our team leader was trying to get some building facilities and things for us. And the major told him, he said, we have children this weekend. Yes, I've heard that. He says, if you will get a toy for each of the children for the weekend, I will give you all of those things you need to build whatever you want to build up there. And so the captain said, we'll do it, and committed us, and came back, and he was very proud of that. And our team sergeant, Larry Maker, was another former SOG guy, CCC, I think he was in the South. He just looked at the captain and said, you did what? Oh, well, all we got to do is get a bunch of toys to hand out to the kids on the weekend. He said, sir, we don't even have an operational budget. We're a composite team. We're nothing. We're a placeholder. And where are you going to buy toys? He said, the major has just worked you over. And now that if we can't deliver, we're screwed. Because that's how it worked. And this was Q Course 101, Robin Sage, working with the G's and getting worked over by the G's. So I was sitting there and I said, I know where there's a toy store, and I know where if we take up a collection amongst the team, we can more toys than not be as many on the island, because we had no idea, but we can get a lot of toys. And the captain said, okay, where is it? I said, it's over in La Union, across the Gulf. He says, what good does that do us? We can't go over there. I said, sure we can. The OGA guys have a speedboat. They'll send me, and I'll go over. And it's a little tienda. It's right there in the town. I'll go over and spend the night. I'll go down. I'll buy bags of toys, and the speedboat will bring me back over. The command, as it should have, said, there's no way, can't do that. That's, we'll all hang if you get caught over there. Well, in the end, he said, go ahead and do it. Because he didn't want to see us get burned. But he had me take an E8 with us. There was another E8 besides Larry on the island. And so we did. We jumped in a speedboat and shot across the Gulf one night and pulled into the La Union OGA base and spent the night. The next morning I got up. The E8 would not go with me into town. He said, I'm not going in there. He said, you just go into town, get what you're going to get. Okay, fine, that's fine. So I took the multicolored cars and trucks that you used to be able to get. They were like a penny. They were just all sorts of little cars and colored trucks. They had barrels of those. So I bought some, I think it was 8 or 9 garbage bags filled with these little trucks and cars and that. And so I had to wait while they filled up the stuff. So I went out on the sidewalk, and it was right in the middle of town, and pulled up a little metal chair, and I was wearing the UDT trunks and jungle boots and a Go to Hell t-shirt and a Bossy Naville baseball cap and my .45 slung low and my pistol belt. And I just kicked back on the chair and put the chair against the wall and had a Pilsner beer and was just sitting there drinking beer, waiting for the toys to be delivered. And the team that was there at the SEMPA at the time and was living in town at the safe house came driving through in the van. And as they're driving by, they see me, and they stop. And the team leader is in the passenger side, and he looks out the window, and he goes, "Sergeant Walker." "Yes, sir." He says, "You're supposed to be in Honduras." "Yes, sir." "And I am." They literally, he told him, "Get going, get to the house." So he took off. He locked that team down for the rest of the day. All night.
We got a bad connection here. Sorry, guys. I'm going to have to dial up Greg again. He's on a Wi-Fi, so it's like in and out.
So hey everybody, hey Andrew, sorry, we'll get to your questions in just one quick second. Okay, the subscriber die.
Sorry, guys. I'm just getting the connection back up. Usually we're better about this.
So we have that weird.
There we go. Here. Guys, thanks for joining us tonight. Please subscribe if you haven't already. And I think we are back on with Greg.
Hey, Greg, we lost you there.
Yeah, I've got audio and looking for visual to come up. I guess that was a story.
Our camera's off. No, our camera should be off.
No, the camera should be on.
No, that's our front-facing camera, I think.
There.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
Okay,
Excellent.
okay. I think we're back on. So, Greg, you got us to the point you were sitting there drinking a beer,
right,
and the team leader from another team came by and was like, "Hey, Greg, what the hell are you doing here?"
You're supposed to be in Honduras, right?
Yeah, you're supposed to be in Honduras, and I said, well, I am. You know, smart ass. And he told the driver, get to the safe house, and he locked that team down for the rest of the afternoon and all night, and then called the OGA over at the Navy base the next morning to make sure I was gone, along with the E8, before he would let his guys out.
So they didn't go over the 55?
Pardon?
So he didn't go over the 55?
Oh, we were over the 55. The E8 was, you know, I thought of myself as being 56 because I was actually downtown being an idiot. The E8 was a safe 57.
Yeah.
He was behind the wire with the OGA. Yeah, that was, and I gathered up my bags of toys and went down the street and around the corner and took them back to the OGA. Took a couple of trips and had a really great lobster dinner that night with them. And we jumped on the cigarette boat and went blasting back across to Tiger Island.
It's really important.
And it was a wonderful success. The major over there, the Honduran major, was stunned that we had all these toys, and Captain was happy, and the kids were happy, and we got all of our building material and stuff like that.
It's really important to understand the significance of Tiger Island and Swan Island in the context of this larger counterinsurgency campaign, isn't it? Because those were both staging grounds.
Yes, they were critical. Tiger Island, I think in particular, because that communication site up there in '84, the tide of the war really swung towards the Salvadoran military. But by '86, the guerrillas were still extraordinarily formidable. But we had we had succeeded in training a significant number of non-commissioned officers in an NCO Corps. We had succeeded in influencing the younger officers, the lieutenants who had become captains, who were on their way to major, to be thinking about how it was that, they needed to fight these people, and how they needed to treat their own people and get away from that Taiwan counterinsurgency thought process and that Condor stuff. And the equipment was, getting into the different units. We had to figure out, we couldn't figure out how to, put a unit in the field that could fight the guerrillas successfully in a counterinsurgency. So because we're dealing with a frontier National Guard to start with, 80, 81, 82, 83. And the guerrillas in 1983 could move in the country in the areas they controlled in battalion-sized formations. That's what people don't understand. I mean, they could move and they could hit quartels like crazy. So it was like, okay, you can't send in, really light guys because they'll get all massacred by the guerrillas who have this, and this. So we created the heavy battalions. We called them heavies, and they were ponderous. They were really well armed. They had lots of ammunition, lots of guys. Moved primarily by truck. And we found out that they were too ponderous. They couldn't get there fast enough. They couldn't get into the fight. They couldn't take advantage of having that overwhelming manpower if they were up against a smaller guerrilla unit. And when the guerrillas bailed, they couldn't chase them because they couldn't move fast enough. So then it was back to the drawing board, and we came up with the BERIs, the immediate action light battalions. And so fewer guys, smarter tactics and techniques, better weaponry and equipment, and we had more helicopters there. And so they moved a lot by air mobile. And it was the BERIs, the BIATs for the heavies, the BIATs. The BERIs proved to be very successful. And they were interfaced with the PRAL, with the reconnaissance guys who were going crazy doing great stuff. And then on the Air Force side, we successfully seen the parachute battalion trained up. And so now you're gelling and you're creating a very formidable modern army in Central America that had never been seen before.
Yeah.
In addition to the training and the advising role, many of you ended up accompanying as well, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, going back to when we started this, in 1986, when the JAG review was requested because of all the awards that were being put in, that were combat awards, they wanted to administratively come back and say, see, you can't do this because this isn't a war. We're only doing this. They're trying to, bolster the administration's narrative. Well, the JAG officer, who was a Major Black, he went on to become a general. I got a hold of that document. I had that document sent to me by somebody. He came back and in his 3-page opinion, and it's in chapter 9 of the book. He came back and he said, I've looked at everything. The staff has looked at everything. And these guys should be getting combat awards and decorations. There's nothing that says that what's being submitted shouldn't be approved. Mm. And of course, that report was like, thank you, in the desk. But yeah, matter of fact, during the final phase, our final offensive in Washington, D.C., I had the opportunity to enlist the formal aid of the FMLN through a highly respected comandante named Gilberto Osorio, who was a colonel. And he was also a Salvadoran American from San Francisco and a Vietnam veteran. And he'd been down there fighting with the FMLN for years. And that's a whole other story. But Osorio came in. I went down there for 3 days to San Francisco and spent 3 days with this was 1993. And I spent 3 days in the Mission District with the Salvadoran guerrillas and did a presentation, gave them back a flag and that. And the FMLN came out and said, "We'll support your effort."
Wow.
And yeah, and that was my hope and my intent, because when you have your enemy come out and say, after the war is over in '92, and they said, and it's in the documentation, it's in the public, they said, when the American advisors started to go to the field and the Salvadoran army started to really fight, that's when we were beat.
Holy shit.
Osorio, and we did we did two 60-minute segments on this. It really put us over the top. Osorio said on 60 Minutes, he said, I gave orders to my guys. He was with the PRTC, which was an extremely radical group. They were responsible for our Marines getting killed in the Zona Rosa, all sorts of stuff. He said, I told my guys, gals, you see an American advisor in the field with the Salvadoran troops, you kill them. They're not supposed to be here.
Can you tell us about some of those events, Greg, where American Special Forces soldiers found themselves engaged in combat with the enemy? Because there were firefights, there was even assassinations. I mean, I was reading in your book. I mean, there was some really gnarly stuff that happened that I just don't think people are aware of.
No, it was very carefully and slowly hidden away. And then they would do is if a guy, they had the first one was the infamous officer with the M16 walking in, and they were saying they only carry 45, they don't have any quote offensive weaponry. And of course we had M16s at the embassy, and they were issuing them. And an American officer got caught walking with his M16, checking out something, carrying it by the handle in civilian clothes. Media said, "Oh my God, a special look," and they pulled that guy out, destroyed his career.
Sure,
it wasn't his fault, and he was not wrong in carrying it. It had been issued to him, and so that's when the lexicon really started up for El Salvador, because we had the first thing smoking, and if you got in trouble or anything, you were on the first thing smoke and back to Panama or up to the States. And that's, that was the deal. You're going to be on the FDS, buddy. And so that's, the other side of that coin is this. We had guys that got wounded, that some of them saw a Purple Heart, many others did not. We had Greg Fronius was our first Special Forces advisor to be killed. They lied about Greg's performance in combat up in El Pariso.
They said that he was like hiding or something, right? When really he was actively engaged in combat with the enemy as the base was being overrun.
The El Pariso was a key base in Chalatenango. The guerrillas owned it for a long, long time. They've been, and we had a special forces team there, rotating in and out. Long story short, the team that was there went on licencia for the weekend and went into the capital. Some of the guys got to fly back home. Gus Taylor, who was the team leader, dear friend. Normally, you would keep 2 guys on base, at least 2, when that kind of licencia happened. Gus had the opportunity to go back to Panama to see his newborn child. And it had been very quiet around the base. And Greg told Gus, he said, go see your baby. I'll be fine. It's only 2 days. And so Gus said, you sure? And yeah. So Gus went back to Panama, and the rest of the team went where it went. And the guerrillas hit them on, I think it was Saturday. and he was killed. The official story, because now you have the first Green Beret killed in quote in El Salvador. So again, the media is like this, and the guerrillas wanted us out of there. So the international press, was really on it. The story came back that yes, Sergeant Fronius was killed, and it's very sad. But he wasn't fighting. He was there on a training mission, and he was asleep in his bunk when a mortar came through the roof of the barracks, and that's what killed him.
Wow.
And that's what they told the family, and that's what simmered it down. Well, the word came, Gus went back up immediately. And long story short, Colonel Stringham went in there, Mill Group Commander Joe Stringham, Smoking Joe, and they knew the truth, and the truth came back down through the grapevine to Panama, and we knew the truth. And the truth was, we brought this out. Now Gus put Greg in for a posthumous Silver Star, and that was not going to happen. Because the Silver Star represents combat, and it represents heroism at a pretty high level. So that wasn't going to happen. And instead, they gave him a Meritorious Service Medal, which is a peacetime equivalent to a Bronze Star with no V. It was a joke. No CIV. It was a joke. No Purple Heart. It was a joke. And sent the body back home. We had 23 our guys were killed there, and they did it with almost everybody. They died in a helicopter crash. How unfortunate! The guerrilla shot down a helicopter, but they died in the crash when actually the two survivors, Colonel Pickett and Spector Dawson, were captured by the FMLN and were executed at the side of the helicopter, the crash helicopter. They lied about every single guy. Or they just said, accident.
I remember there's one case in your book you mentioned where a Green Beret was shot in the leg, and he's ordered to report it as an accidental discharge, as if he shot himself accidentally.
Yeah, an AD. And I said this to the Washington Post when we were successful and we went out and dedicated our memorial in Arlington, which was never supposed to happen. I was asked and the Washington Post actually did a wonderful story, thanks to Andy Messing, who was out sailing in the Caribbean somewhere, I think, retired. I said, why are you doing this? Why do you guys do this? Are you really for some medals? For some other rhythm, stuff like that. What is? And there were a couple of spokesmen, but I was, I guess, the primary spokesman. Put the fool up front. I said no. I said this is we did not fight a dirty war down there. We did everything we could, most of us, by the book and to play it clean and to really be quiet professionals and special forces soldiers and hold accountable the people we were training. Be ethically and morally correct, number one. I said, and two, 23 of us died down there. And 23 families were more or less lied to about it. And so there's kids and wives who don't know what happened or think this is what happened. There's benefits that are not allocated. They're not Gold Star families. And we were supposed to have learned something from Vietnam.
Right.
And so that's why this 10-year battle has gone on. And Congressman Bob Dornan at the time was our champion in Congress. And Bob was eloquent wherever he could be on exactly that thing. They did what we asked them to do. It was a war. They should be taken care of. It's the right thing, and we're going to do it. And so I'm proud to say that in the case of Greg Fronius, I wrote several articles about Greg. And when we went to do the 60 Minutes interview, we were at the Westin in D.C., 60 Minutes put us up there, and they flew a bunch of us in, plus the guerrilla commander and his girlfriend, and it's pretty interesting. And I got a call in my room. They said, there's a guy down here in the lobby that would like to see you. It says his name is Gus Taylor. I'm like, holy crap. So I went down, and Gus was in the front of the lobby. It was in a long coat, and I mean, he looked like he was, because he was still in. He was still active. And we said hi and went over and sat down in a corner, and I learned that Gus had carried the weight of Greg's death forever. Mm-hmm. And it was really crushing him, survivor guilt. Mm-hmm. He in his mind, and he was a superb officer. In his mind, he never should have left him there alone. Mm-hmm. And so Gus said, "Here's what happened," and he told me the whole story, to include when he went back and policed up the 17 pounds that was left of Greg, because Greg had actually woke, grabbed his gear. They had a reaction plan, and the plan was that the Special Forces guys would go up and protect the TOC, which was a reinforced TOC, so the Salvadoran command could get into the TOC and then direct the fight from the TOC, to include calling back to San Salvador in the No group, and then getting AC-130s from Palmarola, Honduras overhead. We had a lot of stuff. So Greg's the only one there, and he throws on his stuff, and he runs out the door, and he goes up to his position, and who the guerrilla commander I interviewed talked to this on 60 Minutes as well. The sapper team was actually trained by the North Vietnamese over in Nicaragua to do those operations. And these guys, when you saw the pictures of the bodies, because they hit another team later on, you would swear those were North Vietnamese sappers lying on the ground dead. They wore the same clothes, the same gear. They were camouflaged with mud and stuff. They were good. So the sappers are coming in, and they had to come down a stone staircase to get to a courtyard, and the TOC was on the other side of the courtyard, and so they were going to get down that stone staircase, get across the courtyard, and they were going to satchel charge the TOC. And if they'd done that, the base would have been, severely lost. So Greg sees this, and Greg goes up to the top of the stairs by himself and gets down, and he starts engaging the guerrillas at the top of the stairs, while the command and everybody is getting into the bunker from wherever they happen to be around the rest of the base, in the midst of a firefight, getting hit by mortars, RPG-7s, and regular light infantry guerrillas. So Greg's up at the top of the staircase, and he is stopping the sapper unit. They cannot get on that staircase, and he's getting hit time and time and time again. And the Salvadoran soldiers down at the bottom were yelling, "Rojo, Rojo," because he was red-haired. Come on, get down here. And Greg warned him off, go, get to safety, protect the command, and fine, and warned him off. And finally, he loss of blood. He tried to move, apparently, down the staircase, and couldn't do it. Fell, rolled down the staircase at the base of the staircase on the courtyard. Sappers come down. Well, by now the TOC is secured, and now they're calling in the world. And the sappers know we can't do it. We can't hit this TOC now. So they check Greg, and they discover it's an American, and he's still alive. And they were so pissed off that they took a satchel charge, put it underneath his body, and blew it in place.
Oh my God!
God damn!
And Gus told me that when he got there, and they took pictures because he was doing the report, the inspection, right? And he gave me the original pictures. And there was a big couple of trees over that part of the courtyard, and Gus said that he was pulling bits and pieces of Greg in his uniform out of the trees. Could only collect 17 pounds. That's all that was left. This is who we said died in his bed sleeping when the mortar shell hit.
And this is a guy, had he died in, say, Vietnam, I mean, maybe he would have been put in for a Medal of Honor for single-handedly defending the TOC the way he did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they got, they put Greg in a, and, when I had those pictures there at that 60 Minutes thing, that was it. Because Greg's brother Steve had been flown out as well. The story of Greg dying had devastated the family. The mom had become unbalanced and was never right. Mm-hmm. And Steve said, we all thought Greg, got killed in bed. What? It was horrible. And they did that to 23 other families. And who knows how many paramilitary guys. So here's this forces officer who's trying to unburden himself. And this is what really happened. Tell his story. And so we did. I got Ed Bradley up and and said, look what we got, and talked to the producer, and they were totally, oh my God. And we got Steve up, and I told Steve the story privately, which was very emotional for him and for me. Gus just disappeared out into the cold. He said, I can't be here, shouldn't be here, but that was my guy.
Yeah.
So here comes the story about Fronius. Now, caveat on this, I knew that he had been hit by ground fire because I had sent a FOIA in long before, when I was writing the stories on Greg, I sent a FOIA in and asked for the records of that. And in full belief that I wouldn't get them, of course. Somebody up there, this is how it worked throughout the whole thing, somebody up there, 45 days later, I get a package this thick. It's everything, to include the autopsy report, diagrams, to include that when they sent the body back, they tried to charge the family $265 in shipping.
Serious.
Then to include the medal recommendations for the Silver Star, 3 generals signed it saying, downgrade to an MSM, no mention of combat. And I've got a diagram with the wound showing what was left of the body, and the report says, 5.56 military wound here, and they marked, the wounds. He was hit multiple times. So when Gus gave us the pictures and the backstory to it, and then we had the guerrilla commander there, who said, "Yeah, that's what happened," because he was part of the crew that made sure they knew how to hit the base, and he was fully documented. That was the deal. When in 1998 in June, they had the largest award ceremony 7th Group has seen since Vietnam at Fort Bragg for 7th Group. I didn't go. I stayed in that story, and I just wasn't. That was my thing. I wasn't going to go. I had my CIB orders, but I had my police chief award me my CIB at the city council meeting with my family present, because they put up for years with me doing this. So they had this huge award ceremony on a beautiful day, and Greg Fronius's now 12-year-old son, because the family was there, everybody was there from the Froniuses, his son walked up and received his father's Silver Star.
Wow.
Unbelievable. We ended up all total with a little Silver Star, Special Forces captain, a very, very well-known Special Forces general. Greg's posthumous Silver Star. I think we had 24 Bronze Stars with Valor, on most of them for major hits on quartels where the SF team fought through the night with their indigenous and pushed the guerrillas back. I put one of my team members in for ARCOM with Valor. We got hit by snipers on a training range one day, and I put both Bob Kaufman and Hubert in. And those guys, who were getting hit by snipers, and we had this young company we were teaching. And these guys, I'm sitting there on the radio calling back to Major Zimmerman, telling him we're getting hit, And Hubert Jackson and Bob Kaufman. Jackson was an E7 at the time. Kaufman was an E5. He was a medic. I look up, and these guys are walking back and forth as the rounds are coming in, and the Salvadoran soldiers are down on the ground trying to get behind trees and behind rocks. These two guys are walking back and forth as if nothing's going on. And they're telling, hey, get down, stay down. Oh, hey, soldado, abajo. Absolutely maintaining order and discipline as if nothing was going on. And we sent, Zimmerman told me, he says, you guys are not to move. You send the Salvadorans up there to take those guys out. And so we did, and they ran them off. So those two ARCOMs with Valor the guys got. We have 79, 80, the last time I checked, officially CIBs. Because the criteria for the CIB and CMB for El Salvador was harder than the criteria to get the same awards for the White Star Project in Laos. That's how hard the Army made it, because they hated it.
Secret war.
Purple Hearts. Yeah, Purple Hearts. Just on and on and on. We got two posthumous VFC for Colonel Pickett, the aviator that the guerrilla shot down and executed after they took him prisoner, and two posthumous POW medals, Pickett and Dawson. Who knew that we had U.S. service members that were taken prisoner and executed?
Right.
I didn't. I mean, this is stuff that I have not even heard of, and I read through your chapter 9 of your book about this just yesterday.
Yeah, these ceremonies. The guy I called the guys at one of the parties in Fayetteville that night, and they said, "Oh, Greg, you should have been here." The veterans were there from that had gotten out, and it was just Joe Stringham, General Stringham, was hosted the awards ceremony. It was huge.
Greg, I'm really glad that we're able to have this conversation and talk about the some of the heroics acts like Greg Fronius and some of these people who it took years of fighting for them to be properly recognized. I do want to talk about the Mazote massacre as well, which is getting into the darker side of this conflict that I also don't want to ignore. Let's take just 1 second. I just want to remind everyone, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I appreciate all of you stopping by tonight. Hit the bell icon, make sure you get notified whenever we go live in the future. And also, if you give us a little thumbs up, comment on this video, share it with other people, it all really helps us get noticed. And also down in the description, there is a link for our subreddit and for our Patreon page if you want to support us and support the stream in a more substantial way. And we really appreciate all of you who already are.
Yeah, and we have a couple of questions. And thank you, Andrew, for the donations. We appreciate it. Hey, Greg, why did those countries choose Taiwan to get their training? When you said that they went there for their counterinsurgency stuff.
Because they had relations with the Taiwanese, military arrangements. El Salvador was very active in that. That was why it was a big deal here not too long ago when El Salvador cut relations with Taiwan to go with Red China. which is now in El Salvador and spending billions of dollars doing all sorts of interesting things. And they had a phenomenal, phenomenal school. So it was an exchange program,
Yeah.
But that's where their base counterinsurgency doctrine came from, and that's to a degree why we had, the very sophisticated massacres that took place, beginning with El Mozote in 1981.
Yeah. And then the other question we had was, considering the struggle to get your service recognized, or the service awards, how do you feel about the Antarctic Service Medal that is issued after 10 whole days?
What was that again?
Considering what you went through to get your combat service, to get everybody recognized for the service that they did, do you have any thoughts on medals like the Antarctic Service Medal that requires 10 days of service in the Antarctic to get?
I'm not familiar with the Antarctic Service Medal, but my response to that would be I was born in Fairbanks, Alaska.
Uh-huh.
I went to school up in Alaska. I did a lot of work up there with the Care Coalition in Alaska in the summer and the winter. And by God, if there's troops up there in the Antarctic, they deserve a medal.
They deserve it?
They deserve a medal. You go out and try to do stuff at 75 below.
Yeah.
Give them a medal.
In 1981, we had the El Mozote massacre down in El Salvador. It was a case of 4 Dutch journalists who were going out to a guerrilla camp to interview the guerrillas and do what journalists do, right? Cover the conflict. And on the way there, they were ambushed and killed by the Salvadorian military. And Greg, I know you did a lot of work on exposing what really happened there, because unfortunately there is a U.S. Special Forces connection. Greg?
It's a pregnant pause.
No, we lost him again.
Sorry for the bad connection tonight, guys.
It's a really bad connection. Yeah. This is just to the point that it's unacceptable. Sorry, guys. Greg's trying to call me on my phone. Oh, it's ringing.
There we
Mr.
go.
Greg.
Yep.
Hey, sorry, brother. We lost you again. So I just wanted to get into
story, though, we're not supposed to talk about it.
Yeah, really. I was wondering if you could tell us about Mozote, what happened, and just kind of lay all of that out, because as I was saying, unfortunately, there is a U.S. Special Forces connection to that event.
Yeah, there's 2 incidents that took place in 1980. Let's see, I had to get my dates correct. The 4 Dutch were killed in Chalatenango. They were ambushed by a military unit that we were training, and it was a deliberate ambush. Because the Salvadoran military and the government at that time did not want the journalists going out and meeting with the guerrillas and covering the guerrilla side of the war. That goes back to your Taiwan doctrine. Journalists are bad, and if a journalist goes and makes contact, but then the journalist is a communist and off with his head. Until then, they had not targeted journalists. So Colonel Reyes Mena, who was a commander out at 4th Brigade at El Paraiso, did target them, and they were killed as they were hiking out to a guerrilla base camp. And the original plan was the ambush party was supposed to take their bodies, disrobe them, take them down to the Limpa River and throw them in the Limpa River. And then everybody would say, we don't know where they are. That didn't happen. They had a change out of lieutenants. The lieutenant that knew the plan got changed out at the last minute. The lieutenant didn't know the plan, just thought, I'm supposed to go out and pick up bodies. So he went out and picked up the bodies and brought them back to the base. And that's where we had he was a mill group staff member. He's very well known. His name is Bruce Hazelwood. And Bruce was there. We had 23 special officers there from 3 who were training this new light infantry battalion. They had no idea that their guys pulled that ambush party that night. As Mena used them was because they're just regular soldados. And so, regular soldados did not go out at night where the Tigers were. The ambush party had to move out about 5 or 6 clicks from the base, which was definitely Indian territory, and stay overnight because they knew they had great intel. They knew where these guys were going to be. So he tasked the commander of the unit. And so our 23 guys didn't know. Bruce knew what was going to happen. And he actually interviewed with the UN in 1991 and told them pretty much. He didn't tell them everything. That was part of the deal. But he had told Reyes Mena he was there on an inspection for the mill group. So he wasn't even a Special Forces advisor. He was Special Forces qualified, and he was a plank owner with Delta and a Vietnam Marine. Phenomenal guy. But he was in El Salvador for 7 years, which many people thought was about 5 years too long. And Bruce basically told Reyes Mena, hey, if you do what it is that you're talking about doing, that's really, really bad. You don't want to do that. And Reyes Mena, no, we're going to do that. Bruce's job was not, was to maybe counsel Reyes Mena and stop it if he could. But his job was to get on the horn or get in a car and drive back to El Salvador or San Salvador or call the mill group and say, this is what they're planning to do. Get those Dutch guys to safety and send, then they'd have the mill group get involved and you can't do this. He didn't do that. The Dutch got hit. They were disrobed. They were brought in. They brought in some of their kit and some of their clothes. And Bruce was still there. And he's on record. And it was in the documentary. I helped with that documentary. Mention why when I get done here. The team, Angel Chamizo, who's a legend. Angel passed away some time ago, but Angel Chamizo was a legend in Latin America with Special Forces. He was sitting around talking with some of his boys when some of the guys came back, and they were saying, we got him, we did this ambush, we nailed him, we killed guerrillas, and we killed these bad white people. And Angel, Sergeant Chamizo, do you want to see? They're in the truck. Angel went, yeah, pretty neat. You guys did it? How come we didn't know you guys were going, So he said he went and looked in the back of the truck, deuce and a half, looked in the back of deuce and a half, and he said right away, and his reports in the UN, I have a copy of it, a copy of all this stuff. And this guy, he said, the force that were in. And so he immediately went back and informed the rest of the group. I think we got a bad ambush here. We got some journalists that have been killed. Well, Bruce was talking to Reyes Mena, who came out and saw that they weren't in the Limpa River. They were on his base. And so he's furious, and B, now he's in a panic. What does he do? So
Hey, Greg, we're going to take you off video and see if that helps.
You lost him.
Oh. All right, let's just call him back, just on voice.
It's frustrating, guys, when you test everything out an hour ahead of time and it works fine, and then the second you start actually streaming, like nothing works.
You want to shoot him a text and tell him that we're just going to do voice and see if that works. See if we can.
Yeah, I mean, jeez. Yeah, I'm gonna tell Greg we're just gonna try to do voice.
Hey, Greg, we're just going to try to do voice and see if that works. You want to turn your video off?
there we go.
Okay, let's see if that's a little bit better.
Yeah, turn your video off.
Okay.
We'll just do voice from here out.
Yeah. What did you want me to turn down?
Just turn your video off.
Turn it off?
Yeah, turn the video off, and we'll just do it by
There we
voice, and we'll see if the connection stays stable.
Okay, I've got the video. I've got the video off.
Okay, great, Greg. Go ahead, please pick up the story then. Where Ray's Menace is like freaking out because now these bodies of these 4 Dutch journalists have been brought back to the base, and he's trying to go into damage control.
He ends up talking to Bruce. Bruce advises him, you got to take care of this, you got to clean it up, and you can't just dump these guys. So, as he said in his UN report, which he now denies that he made, but it's kind of late to deny that. He makes the statement that Reyes Mena, unlike the first time I talked with him, now followed my guidance. And what Bruce should have done was immediately, that was not our mandate. It was not our mandate to play that kind of role. That's always been a problem with Special Forces. It's a problem I address in my book, At the Hurricane's Eye. We saw it in Afghanistan with Jim Gant and some others. They forget who they work for.
Right.
And they get too close to they get too close to it, and they just go sideways. I call it going sideways. I'm sure Bruce would say that's not the case. And I have a lot of respect for Bruce. But what he should have done was got on the horn and said, we got a big problem, and given it to the embassy and let the embassy take care of it and get in there. That was the thing. Now, the problem was that the aid at the time was in such disarray in terms of being guaranteed that it was a very real deal that this kind of, showing the Salvadoran government and the army, was not going to respect human rights. It was going to do exactly what it was that the Americans did not want to see done and was trying to, quote, train them not to do. And the Congress would just shut the aid off. And if they did that, the guerrillas would have taken the country. There was no doubt about that. So how do you can't, if we report this and what happened.
Right.
So what they did is they tried to dress the journalists back up in what clothes had been brought in, They put the wrong underwear on the wrong guys because the Dutch had written their names in their underwear because they were living in San Sal and they were doing, community wash.
Mm-hmm.
And they flew the bodies to a, for lack of a better term, the Poor People's Hospital and Morgue in San Salvador. Wrong place to fly them. I mean, now you got to put on your best face. They sent them there, and the autopsies were done there. They collected up the film cans and cameras that were brought in. Some film was left out at the site, was recovered later. They sent them to the Salvadoran intelligence people to go through. Again, battlefield, okay, that's pretty neat intelligence. What pictures have you taken and of who? But wrong thing to do. And in the end, it was very clear that the mill group got advised. They sent out 2 guys. I talked to one of them, an officer and another guy, and they inspected the site along with the media and the Salvadoran press. And they came back and said, the story that you told us about, getting hit by a big bunch of gorillas and blah, 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 it doesn't fit at all. Mm-hmm. And the report the mill group said was more than likely, this was a deliberate, assassination of these guys. Mm-hmm. So Reyes Mena got tagged with that in the UN report in 92 after the conflict ended. They did the investigations on these war crimes in 91. And he kind of disappeared after the war. So here comes the Dutch are after him, the Dutch war crimes people. It's a big, and you saw this, Jack. I mean, the pain on those people's faces,
I'll put a link to the documentary in the description after we finish tonight, so people who are watching this can go find it. It was an interesting documentary, to say the least.
It's phenomenally done. I thought it was very objective, very even balanced. But they were asking where Reyes Mena was, and of course we were saying, we don't know where that guy is now. This is 2017 or 2018. Well, the Dutch investigative team found Reyes Mena living in Washington, D.C. and confronted him. And he was not a happy man. But he had immigrated here, like so many of the Salvadoran senior officers have over the years, and had managed to live a nice, comfortable life, despite the fact that, for the UN, the guy was a war criminal. So that was one. Now he's, I'm sure he's fighting. The Dutch are still planning to bring him out. They want him extradited to either El Salvador to stand trial or to Holland to stand trial. I hope he goes to Holland and The Hague. So that's the first one, Jack. That's the Dutch there. Now, El Mazote happened about a year later, roughly, and took place out in Morazan, which was definitely controlled. It was a province definitely controlled by the guerrillas. And I'll be very brief. And if you want to go longer, I'm awake, so we can do this, Jack.
Well, another 10 minutes or so on this, and we'll try to come to a natural conclusion.
Okay. And in the case of when you read about the El Mazote massacre, it was huge. It was a huge deal. It's still a huge deal. And long story short, the Atlacat Battalion was the first BIAT that was trained, and it was trained by 3-7. It was trained by Captain Dave Morris and selected some of the best guys we had at 3-7 at the time. And the media and everybody else is stuck with, the Atlacat an elite Atlacat Battalion trained by the United States conducted this massacre at El Mazote. Well, that's not exactly accurate, and General Morris, retired now, and is also with the Green Beret Foundation and is a dear friend. He and I have been working with as research helpers for the gal who was the expert witness for this case, impartial witness, more or less. She's an internationally known war crimes investigator, and just a phenomenal gal. But anyway, that said, the Atlacat, the first generation Atlacat was they pulled in, just these poor kids and these officers that really didn't know what was going on. And it was billed as being, the premier new battalion for the Salvadoran army was going to take it to the guerrillas. And they called it BIRI, Battalion Infantería Reacción Inmediata, or Immediate Reaction Battalion. Well, the training, they did the best they could, and they trained them, they gave them classes in human rights and how to properly treat prisoners and stuff. That has never come out or been touched on. Well, when they graduated the battalion went to the field, and it went up into the Morazan, in and around the village of El Mozote, which was a pretty large town. And every fight it got into, it got its ass handed to it. So the people up there started a little joke, and they said they're not the immediate reaction battalion, they're the immediate retreat battalion. So Colonel Domingo Monterossa, who was the most phenomenal commander at the time, I met Monterossa once, and I still enjoy the fact that I got to meet the guy. He was something else. Well, Monterossa was a graduate of the Taiwan Counterinsurgency School, and he was also with the Atlacat, and he was humiliated by this first generation. So he took over and he cleaned it out, and he brought in who he wanted, and he excluded American advisors being involved in the retraining of this battalion. So the second generation Atlacat had no eyes on and no influence in what they did, how they did it, or why they did it. So Monterossa takes the battalion out, and they mount Operation Rescate, which is called Operation Rescue. They go into the Morazan, and the idea was to take the Morazan away from the guerrillas, rescue the Morazan. And they announced it, and blah, blah, blah. Well, the guerrillas, they saw this battalion coming in. They had great intel. They knew this was a different kind of bird. And they weren't going to fight a fixed-peace battle. That's why it's called guerrilla warfare. So they fell back and did just little holding skirmishes. And the Monterossa's battalion could never make any kind of significant contact. And every time they went into a village or a town, the people would say, they're not even here, So they got more and more frustrated. Monterossa got more and more frustrated. And so he did what he had talked about, which was conducted a limpieza, or a cleansing operation. And in short, they killed all the elderly men, very few young men because they had left, women, elderly women, children, and infants, and 3 other little bitty towns that were satellite towns around El Mozote, plus everybody in El Mozote. They were the Einsatz group of World War II. And when they finally, when they started to go in there, and then they locked the village off so that nobody could see it. The word went out that it was a massacre. They said it wasn't. We sent the same, matter of fact, the same guy that went out to look at the Dutch went out and got pretty close to El Mozote, and then couldn't get any closer. And he said, everywhere I looked, everywhere we went, it was, there was just, devastation. The body count for El Mozote is 957.
Jesus Christ.
Half of those are children and infants. Bayoneted, shot, burned, unbelievable. And that was Monterossa's signal to the guerrillas that, there's a new guy in town. and new tactics, and you're either with us or against us. Well, that was another, oh my God, if it gets out that, that the Army did this, and the Atlacat, who we initially trained, we're done, we're out of here now. And Reagan administration, again, had drawn the line in the sand, and so I am very confident, more than confident, in saying that our State Department people, through our mill group and through state, knew this massacre occurred 24 hours after it had happened. Knew it.
And what was their response?
They obscured it, they covered it up, they accused the guerrillas of making it up, they accused the witnesses of lying, they said they sent these two guys in and they couldn't come up with anything. Actually, they rewrote the senior officer's report. I talked with him, I interviewed him. And it stayed this way for 38 years. And,
so we prioritized our fight against communism in Central America over the human rights, over almost 900 civilians in this case, and something like 75,000 dead civilians overall in the campaign.
Yeah, exactly. And the deal on this was, and everybody has their own opinion, and that's okay. But the deal was, we're down there, and we're saying this is, if you want our aid, if you want our trainers, if you want our guys putting their lives on the line, if you want our armament and our money, if you want reconstruction money, then you got to do certain things.
Right. You got to play by some rules.
Whoa! Now wait a minute. That sounds like quid pro quo, doesn't it?
Well, this is where the Leahy Amendment came from.
Yeah. So, then we allow for a significant human rights thing to take place with the Dutch, and we obscure that and hide that. And then we have 957 people killed, 500 and some being kids and infants, and we hide that. That's why it was called a dirty war, and that was one of the reasons that so many of us got involved in the campaign, to say that is not what the majority of us, the 98% of us, did down there or put up with. Many of us risked our lives. Many of us risked our lives to report, as we were directed to by the embassy and by the mill group commanders, any suspicion of, death squads or murders or rapes or kidnaps or torture. We were all on hit lists by the right wing because they knew we were doing that. Some of the guys went through, really great risks to say, this isn't right, you're not going to do this. That's how we, managed to turn that army around in 86, 87, so that they fought a little differently.
Greg, to start to maybe conclude this segment, and we're going to have you on again, because there's so much more to the things you've worked on over the years, both in Central America and elsewhere around the world. But to start to conclude this specific subject tonight, we're at a time right now where there's a lot of questioning about ethics and special operations. There are these reviews being done, which are also, in my opinion, kind of whitewashes. But it's very much in the public eye right now, this question about ethics, morality, etc. I see the comments from a lot of younger guys, but also older guys who should probably know better, who say, hey, the only war crime is not winning the war. So, my question to you is, do the ends justify the means? We got communism out of our backyard in Central America. Was it worth it?
The ends never justify the means. I'm doing some work now on some World War II stuff having to do with the Nazis and their policies. And if you want to say the ends justify the means, then I can pull. That's exactly what the National Socialist doctrine and theory said about murdering, 6 million Jews, Gypsies, Romas, and anybody else that they figured was undesirable and needed to be, cleansed, communists, whatever. And that's sorry, if that's how you think, then I feel really badly for you. The other is, yes, bad stuff happens in war, duh. But, the American fighting man and the American soldier and the American military is, for 260 or 70 years, despite all the things that happened and that we have done, certainly, even in that wonderful movie, both in Saving Private Ryan and, what's the other one? Band of Brothers. It shows American soldiers shooting down German prisoners. That happened. But we've always made a point of trying to limit the beast that comes out in our soldiers during war, and we've always tried to. There have been guys that have been tried, and we're known for that. And it's one of the reasons why around the world we get to have our soldiers, because these countries, whether they're allies or not, they know, hey, the American soldier, he fights pretty fair. And so that's why we have this, we tie this with these countries that we go into for whatever reason. You're not going to get the military aid unless you stop massacring people. Just because you're not going to get, the best of the best to come down and train you on this, that, or the other thing so you can defend yourselves and be part of our overall strategic defense if you don't stop, doing this. And that was a key thing for the war in El Salvador, was the human rights thing. I mean, they've been having matanzas or massacres forever. Just like in Guatemala, just like in Honduras, and just like in Nicaragua. And, it was tied to that. And our mandate, part of our special forces mandate, was, to teach human rights, to teach proper prisoner handling, to teach that you can get information without sticking a cattle prod up somebody's ass. And you don't kill foreign journalists and strip them of their clothes and throw them in the Limpa River to make a point. And so when, to answer your question, Jack, when you have our guys who are taught and trained that from the moment we go into basic training with the Geneva Convention and the rules of engagement, and I don't want to hear anybody anymore say, these rules of engagement are always screwed up and they hurt our troops. When I hear that, I think, those are people that don't understand the rules of engagement at all. Right. Sometimes they can be pretty restrictive. But, for the most part, we pretty much get to do what it is that needs to be done. We just got to do it smart. I'm not a fool. I've been in 2 wars. I got a star on my CIB, and I spent 10 years on the street as a cop, living under constitutional law of what I can and cannot do as a police officer. So, that's the, and I was brought up right. So to answer your question, when you ask our guys to go in there and be that model and try to impart that model to these forces, and they do so, and they do so at great risk to their own lives, and then the same government that sends them there turns around and covers up these incredible massacres and the political murders. We can't control the guerrillas. Can't control them. That's why they're the bad guys. But we are supposed to control ourselves. You send a bad message into the military and into that young soldier or that young soft guy or that middle-aged soft guy who's got way too many deployments, that, anything that, you start going off the rails, anything that you can use to justify a bad act or overlooking a bad act leads to committing a bad act. And, we've been fighting for 20 years, and it's just taken such a toll.
Yeah.
And El Salvador, they've been down there, and they've been saying, we've got to correct this. We have to look at our own history and come to terms with it so we can begin a healing process and they finally have. The UN War Crimes report came out in '92. Almost immediately, both the FMLN and the Arena Party, which was the right-wing guys, passed a law in the new peaceful El Salvador granting amnesty to anybody that was accused or alleged to be a war criminal.
Wow. And that must have been a long time coming. I mean, reconciliation after such a bloody war is not easy.
And and so these guys, and there's plenty of FMLN war criminals, and those are the ones that are next on the docket to start getting. The UN went after them as well. The Army, unfortunately, committed, I think it was 87% of the legitimate war crimes by definition. But there's some FMLN politicians down there that did some hideous things that they're up for trial next once El Mozote is over. And they're scared to death, and they should be. But
Greg, the other question. I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish your thought. I had one more question.
In 2016, the Salvadoran Congress threw the Amnesty Act out. El Mozote was the first one to go up for trial. The FMLN and the Arena tried to get a second amnesty law passed, and the world came down. Literally, the world came down on them and said, "You're not doing that. You are not going to hide this stuff anymore, or you don't get anything from any of us." That's kind of a gross simplification, but that was the message. So right now. El Mozote, the investigation is almost over. There's 18 former senior officers that are going to be on trial in another, I think, in 3 months. They can't leave the country. They have to report to their attorneys and to the court. The judge down there is unbelievably good and brave. And they're holding this whole thing in Morazan, in this little bitty courthouse in Morazan. It's not in the city. And just this last week, General Bustillo, who was the commander of the Air Force, pretty sharp guy, he's one of the defendants. He blew everybody's mind. He came out and in the investigation hearing portion, he said, "I have something to say." And the judge said, "What do you want to say?" He said, "I want to make a statement about who's responsible for El Mozote." And the judge said, "Oh." And Bustillo's defense attorney said, "Your Honor, I want the courtroom cleared. I don't want anybody in here because I don't know what he's going to say. I don't want my client to incriminate himself." And Bustillo said, "No, I want everybody here because the civilians, the citizens were there. A lot of them survivors and family members of people lost." And the judge said, "Whatever you say could be used against you." And Bustillo said, "It's fine." And Bustillo came out and he said, the Army did commit this massacre, and it was wrong. And we are responsible for this. That has never, ever happened. It was certainly not expected that day. So this thing will go forward into trial. Now, whether these old guys go to jail or not is hard to say. But the key is that there is going to be the first trial. This is the worst massacre in modern Latin American history. To actually have happened and now to come to trial 38 years later. The next one is the murder of the Jesuits by the Atlacat in 1989, Jesuit priests. And then after that, the Dutch is right behind that one, so Reyes Mena is probably getting a little anxious. And the interesting thing, yesterday, day before yesterday, U.S. State Department, Secretary of State Pompeo issued a formal State Department news release naming 13 Salvadoran officers, to include Bustillo, that are now forbidden to visit the United States or to immigrate to the United States because, quote, I've read the news release, credible evidence shows that they are responsible for war crimes and the murder of the Jesuit priests in 1989.
I saw that.
And I mean, that is such a turnaround of our position on this for the last 38 years. And I think I think Bustillo may have known that was coming, which is why he decided he was going to say something. Because once we give up the archives that we've been holding back on who knew what when for El Mazote and for the Jesuits and for the Dutch, all those people that are charged in those, they don't have, America isn't hiding them anymore. Our government is not hiding them anymore.
And Greg, my last question tonight, and I'll turn it over to Dave after. Speaking of Mike Pompeo, this last week he had this comment that Americans don't care what's happening in Ukraine, that no one cares about that. You can't even identify that country on a map. What's the big deal? I mean, we're talking about war crimes that happened decades ago in a small little country, El Salvador. Why does this still matter? Why are you so passionate about this? Why are you still pressing the issue? Why do you think it's important for the ICC or whoever else, The Hague, to continue to attempt these prosecutions? Why should this matter to people here in 2020?
What a great question. And I'm not gonna paint myself as anything other than, a sinner saved by Jesus Christ when he died on the cross thousands of years ago. And, for me, I was raised. And as I said, when we started, when I grew up reading books about, the revolution and reading about the Civil War, which my relatives fought in, and reading about the Marines on Tarawa and Guadalcanal, and then reading about the American forces that liberated Treblinka and Dachau and Buchenwald and Auschwitz, and how sick they got and how horrified they were when they saw the man's inhumanity to man times 100. Watching the court-martial of William Calley when he allowed his unit to commit the My Lai massacres. Our government, decrying the brutality of the North Koreans and the Red Chinese and the North Vietnamese, and I thought that's what we are. We're not the world's policemen. We're the world's true good guys. We're not perfect, and we made our own mistakes. But that's why people want to come here. That's why I'm proud to be an American. My 4 kids went in the service and did their time in GWAT. As did so many others. That's how I was raised. You do the hard right over the easy wrong. And, and as a Special Forces soldier, and wanting to be one ever since I was 14, my mentor was Roger Donlin. And I've met Roger. I went to DLI with Roger. I sat with Roger when he came out here to Portland for the Special Forces Association dinner. Roger mentored Leroy Petrie, Medal of Honor winner from 2nd Ranger Battalion, at my request. Ken Bowra, you do what's right and fair by the soldier, regardless of what may or may not happen with you. That's how I was raised. That's how I was trained. And when myself and John McMullen and so many of the other guys and the nursing corps, when we got Nellie Guzman, her Purple Heart, which I didn't want to give her because I didn't want to say a woman was hit by fire in El Salvador as a nurse. The feeling I had back then went from I want to join the VFW and we should just get a little ribbon. How hard is that? The more I learned about this war and the more I learned about our culpability and our responsibility in it, and talked with, so many others, the more that I felt, if we're gonna fight a 10-year war to take care of our dead and their families, and get a reward for doing that by being able to pin on a little, CIB or a CMB or whatever, then we have a responsibility to the people whose country we fought in, as well. And by standing up and getting involved, I was contacted. They found me. The Dutch found me. Scared the crap out of me when they called, because of the Salvador campaign, and asked, "Will you help us try to find this guy and explain to us, what was going on?" Because we're in Holland and we don't really know. And that led to El Mazote. That's the hard right over the easy wrong. We didn't fight a dirty war, and we're not going to. Special forces should never stand by and say, "Well, that's just the way it is."
Yeah.
That's there's too many good Green Berets out there, good officers and good enlisted guys, and that just. You can't let the few rotten apples or those whose judgment has become clouded or those who have become bitter let 570 some little kids just disappear just because. And, the thing of it is, it took us 10 years, but the hidden war in El Salvador is now an authorized military campaign. Hopefully that's affected something as far as, what we do. And now, I had people very close to me on El Mazote and on the Dutch who said, "Why don't you shut up? Why don't you and Dave Moore shut the hell up? Who cares? Who cares?" And I keep thinking, that's exactly what the Nazis said.
Well, that's why it happens in the first place, because everyone involved was like, "Who gives a shit?"
I said, it's not a question of me shutting up. I'm doing the right thing. The question is, why aren't you doing the right thing?
Exactly. Yeah.
And I got, and when I get a call from Major General Ken Bowra that says, "Greg, I'm proud of you," and proud of the guys, Dave Morris. Good job. All the naysayers and the Bruce Hazelwoods and, the politicians who lie their way through these things, that doesn't mean anything to me. So that's it. Let's see justice done. Let's make it, let's make it right.
Greg, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This has really been incredible. We really need to do it again because there's so much else to you and to what you've done over the years, helping out Special Forces veterans and other veterans and other things in your Special Forces career. And Dave doesn't know this. Greg, you worked with Dave's friend, Jeff Kirkham, in Iraq.
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah, Jeff was part of the Alpha Company. We took 82 of us over there. Jeff became the team sergeant of my team over there that I was on, 912. And John Beckstrom, the former team sergeant, he got promoted to sergeant major. John and I went over and became part of a integration team monitoring all of the coalition and U.S. soft operations for the war, and then went into Baghdad together. But yeah, Jeff was a monster on a Midway. He took a good team and made it a great team.
Jeff is an outstanding individual for sure. Huh. Well, it is funny, Greg, because I read your book so long ago, and it influenced, a lot of the choices that I made, coming up in the military, and then, and you've written for periodicals too, right, on knife tactics and things like that.
Yeah, I've written a lot in the time I've been on the planet. 17 books and about 350 articles, and edited 2 magazines, and and then managed to stay involved with Special Forces the reserve capacity, and I just had a great career. OIF was my last run in uniform, and I served with some phenomenal people, I'm blessed. Like I said, I was just a kid who just wanted to be a Green Beret, and I wasn't anything special in a group of very special people. I just got blessed. I do want to say, I've decided I want to share something with you guys before we get off.
Sure.
And this is such a great place. There's only 2 people that have ever heard this before. I got in our campaign for combat recognition, I had just a very few letters, and then after we got the awards and that, gee, Walker, you did this just for yourself, didn't you? You just wanted to get a CIB, so you did this just for yourself. And when I heard that, I thought, that's such an insane statement, because nobody in their right mind is going to spend 10 years and involve so many people and take the risks that I took physically and others did as well. 3 days in San Francisco by yourself, sitting around with 35 Salvadoran guerrillas.
Yeah.
That when I got into that room and looked around, I thought, this might not be such a great idea. But we got the packet went up the second time and came back down. And I got a call from Bragg, and they said, they rejected it again. And it was a beautiful packet. I mean, it was an incredible packet. Plus all the awards and decorations for Fronius and for Leroy Sena and his team, and just on and on and on. And so I called General Bowra, who was the USSOCOM commander at the time, and talked to him about it. I said, "Sir, what do we do? What else do you need? What do you guys need?" He said, "We've got it all, Greg. They're just doing this because they're doing it." Mm-hmm. And he said, "I'm going to send it back again." And I already mentioned that he was my friend and mentor, and I said, Ken, that's going to hurt you. That's when it came out. He said, "No, hey, it's the right thing to do, and I'm going to do it." Well, I knew I had pissed a lot of people off in D.C. over a 10 years period of time. And so I said, "Sir," I said, do you think that my having an award in there, that somebody at Awards and Decorations or somewhere else, that they're just so furious that I'm now a real obstacle to this packet being passed?" Mm-hmm. And that may sound, grandiose, but I mean, at that point, after 10 years of fighting and going through, unbelievable stuff, and knowing who I pissed off, and putting the Pentagon on 60 Minutes when they lost so badly, I said, "Sir, do you think that, somebody would, out of sheer spite?" He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Sir, if you think if you have the slightest thought that that's the case, pull my recommendation for a CIB out and send it forward, and send a note or whatever general officers do to say, you might want to review the list again. There's a name that's missing. Mm-hmm. And he said, why would you do that? And I said, because this isn't about me. And if for any reason, it is about me, then take it out of there and get it passed so the other guys, so the real reason can come to fruition. And there was a pause, and this is why he's a major general. He came back, he said, Greg, I'm not doing that. He said, I'm going to do what's right and fair for every soldier that's involved in this and whose name is in that packet. Don't ask me again. Yes, sir. He sent it forward a third time, and it went through. So I guess my point on sharing that is that anybody out there that is listening to this that, thinks that this was a self-motivated, selfish action, it wasn't.
Right.
And I got, I had a superior general officer reinforce, what you asked about, Jack, whose ethics and morals, whose combat background cannot be challenged by anybody. Stand up and say, you do what's right. Mm-hmm. Regardless, you do what's right. And take care of the troops. And that's what we need. We need more guys like Ken Bowra.
100%.
So we have less guys like Eddie Gallagher.
Yeah, I wasn't going to go there, Greg, but I don't disagree with you. We're at sort of a cultural crossroads, and I was disheartened to see the comprehensive special operations review that SOCOM released this week on soft ethics, which was conducted by a bunch of former SOCOM officers. It was basically an inside job. And they said, no institutional problems, no systemic issues. Everything's great here. Well, we'll have a few little fixes here and there, little modifications and training, but nothing to see here. Move right along. And it's like, are you fucking kidding me? And the fact that guy, that SEAL Team 6 dude who killed Staff Sergeant Melgar in Mali,
yeah,
he committed that murder, got investigated and brought home. He was sent immediately back to the States for it and was promoted. And the Navy promoted him. And that shows you, no, it's not like bro culture at the troop level that's broken. Mm-hmm. It shows you that there is an institutionalized culture that goes straight to the top that condones that type of behavior.
Mm-hmm. And what you just said is true, straight to the top. Straight to a president who never served a day on active duty, and who thinks that, the Charlie Sheen represents what Navy SEALs are. And, you couldn't have said it any better.
Yeah, I kind of get fired up over this topic.
Shame.
We have two more questions that we need to address real quick.
Jack, one thing I'll add to that.
3.
I bet that people who did that study didn't go down the street and talk with and demand to see the database for the SOCOM Care Coalition that now I think has over 8,000 seriously injured, wounded, and ill SOF members in it. That is one of the best databases ever in terms of accountability on wounds, deployments, medications, suicides, and SOF, which are at the highest rate that they've ever been, divorces at the highest rate that they've ever been, and said, give us the input that you guys are seeing, because you're seeing the side that nobody wants to know about, so we can make a true report. I can guarantee you that they didn't want to know and didn't want to hear and didn't want to see.
Well, Greg, we got to go to some user questions, but some people who are watching us right now. But just to dovetail off of what you just said, I had a conversation with someone today who studied soft suicides academically, and this person told me, in their opinion, SOCOM's attitude towards that very question, that very thing you just brought up, is that SOCOM's approach is no data, no problem. So they will brush all of that data you just talked about under the carpet so they don't have to address it. But anyway, what are the questions we have?
So thanks again, guys, for the donations. We really, really appreciate it. You helped us buy each bottle of scotch to share during the show. So question, what can the U.S. and Mexico do to help stabilize the smaller Central American states?
I had some really interesting conversations with Colonel Rex Applegate when he was still alive, and Rex Applegate was a legendary OSS officer.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things that Rex did after World War II is he became an official traveling expert for the U.S. government in and around and about Mexico. And this is years ago now. But Rex shared some of the things that he shared with our government with me, and what he was projecting, many, many decades ago, have essentially, in most cases, become true. So that said, that's why I'll answer the question in this way. In my opinion, the first thing that we could do and need to do is to stop, take a mature attitude with a mature leadership at the highest levels, and go down to Mexico or have the appropriate Mexican officials come up to us and sit down at a table and say to them, how can we help you in good faith? And not make any demands and not make any threats or any of that nonsense, but say, we all know we got big problems. How can we help you so that you can help us and help everybody else? And start a process of honest negotiation and mediation and coordination, and then tie it to, like we always do, the Foreign Aid Bill just passed. I read the Foreign Aid Bill today. If you want to read a very interesting document, sit down and read the Foreign Aid Bill. It's pretty interesting. But, deal with them fairly and appropriately and honestly as much as possible, and tie our cooperation and our resources to, you got to do certain things. You got to have a quid pro quo. You got to stop doing this. You got to put a wall up here. You got to take these people back. You got to, how can we invest in your country to make it better for your people to stay in your country because they got work?
Right, and that impacts the illegal immigration problem that we have here in the United States, and so many other things.
Yeah, well, part of our immigration, if anybody that's listened to the last 2 hours of this show, is that we left El Salvador and it's a mess.
Yeah.
And they can't live there. There's no work, there's no jobs. Their president, who's a very sharp young man, who was interviewed several months ago, and he said, our economy is broken. Yeah. And that's why people are leaving. They're scared of being murdered. They're scared of being kidnapped. They got no work. If you want to be a world leader, then behave like a world leader. Think out of the box and get rid of the imperial hubris that we have.
Okay, somebody else said, can you guys briefly explain the Iran-Contra affair? I'm not that good in history but of that incident. And if you talked about it earlier, what was your favorite meal in Central America?
That's the best question of the night. My favorite meal in Central America was in El Salvador in La Union when our team found a floating village at the far end of La Union on the Gulf of Fonseca. It was called Nick Village, and it had been put together by Nicaraguans who had fled Nicaragua, come across to the Gulf, and they were living there. They built this little floating village, partially on land and otherwise. And you could go down there, and they had a bunch of restaurants, and the best meal after a day's training was you could get 3 huge camarones, 2 lobsters, and 2 Pilsner beers for $5.
Well, that sounds like heaven. I mean, if I imagine heaven, that's exactly what it sounds like.
And to sit there in the climate on the little benches, listening to the music and looking out at the Gulf of Fonseca and saying, "Yeah, baby, this is what Special Forces is all about."
And on a less delicious topic, you want a brief history of Iran-Contra?
Man, that's a whole episode in of itself. But I don't know. Did you ever come in contact with any of the moving parts of what today is known as the Iran-Contra conspiracy or scandal?
I can answer that pretty quickly because, again, here I'm not going to blame President Reagan. I like President Reagan. I voted for President Reagan. Here again, our government, because it couldn't figure out how to do what it wanted to do in a more creative manner, went over to the dark side, and we wanted to get Nicaragua back, and so we did the exchange with Iran. It was stupid. It was just a stupid thought process, and the reason that it was stupid in my mind is because when number one, Somoza was a bad guy, and the only reason that we backed Somoza was because he was our guy, big time. And when we just simply failed to get it right. Just like when we sent the OSS into North Vietnam to meet Ho Chi Minh, and our OSS guys came out and said, "Hey, we ought to back this guy Ho Chi Minh. He's pretty squared away." And our government said, "We're going to back the French because we liked them." That worked out real well.
Right.
So you have Nicaragua fall to the Sandinistas, very clever people, bad guys. And so they go and they raise the Contras up. Well, the Contras were the worst scum of the earth. And anybody that studies the Contras and what they did and their leadership and everything, those guys, all they did was get rich and plunder and rape. And, they literally, the Contras literally kept the Sandinistas in power at a time when they had just taken power where they were the most vulnerable. And pressure could have put on them economically and diplomatically to maybe do some different things. That's just a flat fact. So, you screw up Iran, you have this huge nightmare, just like we're having with this impeachment nonsense, and the Contras were not the answer to any degree for any reason. It was just incredibly dumb.
And last question, and hopefully this can be a short one for me. What does Greg think of La Mano Dura?
Of who?
La Mano or Mano Dura?
Who is Mano Dura?
La Mano Dura. L-A.
I think I know what that they're talking about. The Iron Hand. Yeah, the Iron Hand, Dura, Iron Hand. That's, if I can recall correctly, that's a really interesting question. That person asked a really interesting question. If I'm recalling accurately, Mano Dura was like Mano Blanca, the White Hand. These were all death squad, anti-communist, anti-socialist, anybody who was against the established regime and the business interests, and committed all sorts of interesting atrocities and crimes. What do I think of them? I think of them the same way when I was a cop that I thought about street gangs like the Crips and the Bloods and the Hells Angels and any number of other dirtbags who feed off of good people and create chaos in civilizations and take human lives needlessly for their own miserable benefit.
So
Hunt them down, arrest them, try them, and put them in jail, or execute them.
Well, we actually kept Greg even longer than I thought we would. So, Greg, thanks so much for joining us tonight and being so candid with us and sharing your experiences with us. We're definitely going to have to do it again at some point because we're just kind of scratching the surface. But we are going to do a second segment for our supporters after this. And Greg is going to tell us the story of one of the more curious stories of this entire war in Central America is a American Green Beret who defected and went to the other side and joined up with the communist guerrillas. And Greg, it was something I looked into at one point, but Greg cracked this story wide open and got to the bottom of it. And it'll blow your mind. It really is just wild. But for everyone else who joined us tonight, thank you so much for coming and watching. I really apologize for some of the issues we had, the technical issues in the first half of the interview. And I'm sorry to Greg also for having to deal with that. We're going to have to work on some of those things.
Yeah.
But for now, please remember to subscribe to the channel. It's a work in progress. We're going to get there together, guys. And hit the bell so that you get notified. Leave some comments. Give us a little thumbs up to help this video get spread far and wide. There is this link to the subreddit in the description and also the link to our Patreon page if you want to help us continue doing this.
Yeah, and just $1 a month helps. If every one of our subscribers gave $1 a month, we'd pay the rent on this place.
It would be done. It would be a done deal.
Yeah, we'd be rich.
We wouldn't be rich, but we would break even. We would break even. That's a good thing.
We would break even. So if you have $1, send $1. We appreciate it, guys. And thank you for joining us. We really appreciate that. And thanks to Greg.
Thank you. Thank you.
There are so many more questions I want to ask you, Greg. We'll have to do this again. Thanks, guys.